and welcome to Write Volumes. Behind the Volume present Shades of Writers video interview. My name is Janaea. I'm one of the editors and founders of Write Volumes. Our goal is to give diverse voices an outlet for expression and to bring attention to diverse writers and our thoughts. We are releasing a monthly newsletter where we will feature interviews of our wonderful writers to help people like you get to know them better. And now we'll also do video interviews to delve deeper into some topics that are conveyed better over video. Our second video interview conversation is with JoJo. Jhoselin Dominguez, also known as JoJo, is one of our Write Volumes authors. She is a graphic design graduate from Fort Hays State University, part-time writer and full-time artist living in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. Her love of writing began amongst friends back in the 7th grade. Her fictional short stories explore existential topics and characters that wander through her mind. Welcome, JoJo. You wrote Scene for the horror anthology. Did you write horror before, or was this your first time?
It's interesting because I think this is only ever like the second horror story I've ever attempted to write or like completed. Because the first time I ever tried to write horror, I was very young. It was a very long time ago, and I just thought it would be an interesting thing, like when you're like experimenting back in like, as I said in my description, back in 7th grade, where you're just like coming up with all these things. And I wrote something then that scared me so much. I didn't want to write horror ever again. Like, to me as a small child, like I was just like me writing that, I didn't like the feeling that I got from what I wrote. And the thing was is that like now I understand that like no, that's the point. That's the point of horror, like you don't want to feel like it's about achieving that feeling. But at the time when I was much younger, I was like, I want to write about good things. And I think a part of me still kind of wants to, but I wanted to just give it another try, especially with like the idea of just like, well, horror is such a huge thing, and especially like recently I've been embracing more like horror films, and I've been watching more of that kind of stuff, like versus like when I was much younger I hated that. And I've been embracing more of like the horror genre, especially in regards to like film and stuff like that. And I was thinking about like, I was like, no, there's so much that you can do with it, and I was curious about it, and so I thought I'd give it another shot.
Would you write horror again after Scene?
Mm, I'm more of a psychological thriller.
Okay.
So like for me, like that's the things that really scare me, which is why I wrote Scene the way it was. So if I found a concept that psychologically just messed me up enough to the point where I wanted to write again, then I would. But it would have to be something that really like, that kind of gave me that same kind of feeling. And I would want to write horror again. I don't see myself casually writing horror. It would be more of like an intent to do so.
Okay. Did writing horror change your writing process?
Yeah. Particularly with like with Scene, because Scene was really interesting. I don't know if you have a question later on that like dives more into like um how I was inspired to write this, or like where I got the inspiration for it. But I might talk about it right now because I think
Yeah,
it
go for
kind of
it.
makes. Yeah. I was inspired to write it because of my roommate.
Oh no.
She she like, okay, that makes it sound horrible, but it's not. She's just a very observant. She's more of an observant person than I am. I'm really not. I make it seem like I am, but it's only because I'm really trying to in certain situations. But she is a very observant person, especially when it comes to people watching. And the main character for Scene, she's definitely a people watcher. And so what it really was is that like I was thinking about like it was more of that psychological horror of me thinking, if you're so intently watching someone else, imagine how somebody else must be intensely watching you. And it was that thought that really kind of like psyched me out and that I couldn't stop thinking about. It was that horror that kind of like really like ingrained itself in me. And so when I came to the writing process, it was pretty difficult because I was trying to embody just like that feeling, this like psychological fear. And I hadn't really attempted to do something like that since I was very young, or like since like I'm sure what I wrote when I was very young is actually not that scary, but it was scary to me. And so for the first time, it was something that was specifically to invoke this feeling done in a narrative way, which typically, as I said before, I think is usually achieved best through poetry.
Mm.
And so the writing process was, I really had to try to figure out how to make this feeling into a story. And that's where I ran into a lot of like bumps and avenues, and I had to change it so much, and I had to really try to figure out where this was going and stuff like that. And it was because I was trying to figure out what narrative could describe this feeling best, more so than versus like other things that I write. You know, it's all about narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And the theme is something that is interwoven. Versus horror, at least the way I went about writing this, maybe I need to change my process for that. It was more so about trying to find the narrative that can fit within this feeling.
Okay. So as you said, like Christine is a voyeur and she only interacts kind of with her neighbors by watching them. What do you think causes her to be so distant from people?
I think it's interesting with the way that I portrayed Christine, because the way that it's written, everything is very detailed and very specific to Christine. You know, it's very, I wanted to create this idea of like this very detailed, like someone is watching, you know. And Christine has so much detail in her life, but you don't know anything about her as well. It's creating that contradictory thing. And so because you don't know anything about her, you have nothing to go on it. And so she's in of itself like a character that is very isolated, very empty, kind of,
Mm-hmm.
in that kind of way. And so my way of like seeing like why she would want to view other people is because she doesn't have anything like that for herself. You know, she's very like isolated and like I guess more introverted,
Mm-hmm.
and her life is only exists and so like through this veil, so she tries to find that life in other people.
Do you think there's a lot of people in society today who acts that way? I mean, I know you said your your roommate, but do you think there's a lot of other people?
I think i think especially so now with like at the time of this recording, quarantine happening with COVID. And so people are spending so much more time isolated and so much time like shut in and like seeing the life through their windows and seeing life through like other avenues, you know, that they can't be a part of. And I think it's certainly true that like I think some people live their life that way, you know. It's a little bit of like an like I guess you could say metaphorical in that like people sometimes live vicariously through other people. And I think people do that all the time, either literally now or I guess metaphorically in the way that they live, that they choose to live.
Yeah. Yeah, looking out the window means a lot. I think means different things now than it did like a year ago.
Oh yeah, it really does. And it's interesting because like I'm curious to see how much like what how everything that has happened, especially throughout this year, how it will affect writing specifically. I'm curious to see what will come out of all of these experiences that we're all having right now.
Yeah. It's kind of shared, but it's also very individual, like these shared individual experiences. So, like you mentioned, there's very specific details in this piece. It's like you're painting a picture, or perhaps you're a graphic designer. um, Instead of little man, she likes to rub the handle of the strawberry-shaped handle of her spoon when she stirs her coffee. And on Thursday, she wears fluffy green socks that she saves just for this occasion, which again is one of the lines that I really love about this piece. How do these details affect Christine's enjoyment of her voyeurism hobby? Like, do they give her comfort, or is it more like a ritual?
I think it's in part like it's a little bit of both. I think it's very ritualistic for her. You know, the fact that she has created this little life of this little hub of like, okay, and Thursday nights, I'm going to sit here and I will watch. You know, like she's like creating this little life of like, this is the thing that I have like filled my life with, and it's creating this little ritual and creating um this activity for her to do. And so I think like the little details that she has built on top of it to bring as much excitement to this as possible allow her to feel comforted by it. You know, because like I think Christine is a little bit, you could say, I don't know if it's like it's a little bit intentional that she wonders of herself as she's like, should I be watching my neighbors? Like this is kind of weird. Like, but I don't think she thinks about it too much because she sees it more as a thing for herself. She sees it more as a comfort for her, and so she's a little bit selfish that way. But and so the details kind of like make it more of an event for herself, and so I think that brings her comfort.
Yeah, I can see it. It's almost like this is what we do every Thursday. And it's like how other people might get together to watch a movie with friends or go out to eat or just watch a TV show. And this is her event for the week, kind of.
Yeah, it's her thing.
So both of your stories have an active female lead. Was that a conscious decision? And do you have like a preference in the gender of the characters you create?
Not really. It's interesting because um more often than not, typically I actually write more from a male's perspective. In some other stories that I have, I've written in a male perspective and I've written in female perspective, both ways. But I think more often than times I do tend to write in from a female perspective. And it's mostly just because I feel like it's the perspective that I can most confidently give. You know, because I don't there is a little part of myself that doesn't want to make too many assumptions about a world that I don't understand. And there's another part of me that kind of wants to venture out into like, well, this world can be whatever I want it to be. That's the point why like this is like something that I can write about. But I've written perspectives. I've written stories from both perspectives before, so I don't really have necessarily like an adamant preference for either, but I do find myself more often than not writing from the female perspective.
That's that's interesting. It's funny because sometimes when I read stories, I try to think like, okay, is this a female writing a female, or is this a male writing a female, or is this female writing a male? So it always adds in that layer of how much, how observant we are of other people and how empathetic we can be. So
Yeah, it really is, especially with one of my favorite like novels that have come out in in the recent years has to do with this young female graphic designer living in New York, but it's a male author that wrote it. And so I've like looked into like some of the things that he has talked about by like his process about writing from a female perspective, and he said that if there were some things that he wasn't sure of, he would ask women in his life, or he would literally his he would give the stories to the women of his life and be like, does this make sense? And he would have to find that perspective. And I think like that's incredible. And especially like if you want to accurately portray that, if that is your goal,
mhm.
then I think it's really important to make sure you get that out.
Do you feel from your art, or do you feel art can make a difference in people's lives, as in both writing and visual? Or is it more about how the art affects you in creating it?
I
I
think
think
it's a little, you know, because the topic of art is it's interesting. It really is. It's confusing. It's ever changing, and I think it's very infinite and it's very important. you know, because I mean, you think about how humanity has worked even from like the very beginning. People were drawing cave paintings for no other reason than either it could be storytelling, it could have been aesthetic, you know, and like you can only help but wonder, like, was the first person to create art as we understand it like that, literally in like as cave paintings, did they do it for themselves or did they do it for the sake of people around them? Did they do it for the sake of their legacy or did they do it just as the moment, as like the purest way of like humanity expressing itself, you know? And that's like something that like I've had so much fun exploring and having conversations about, especially because I work in an art museum, you know, and I work in a modern art museum, if that. And if anyone is like knowledgeable about how modern art is, it's strange. I will say that. it's it's contradictory. It's strange. It's a conversation. You know, it's and whether or not like some things are deemed art and some things shouldn't be considered art is like subjective, but it's also collectively understood and accepted. Like, I don't know, I think it's all about the conversation and just finding that expression. So it's I think it's learning, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of putting it. It's art can be seen as a conversation, and I think it is very personal on what you choose to take away from it, whether or not you choose to say, this isn't art, but it made you think and reflect on how you view the world or how you view yourself. I still think that's an important piece to have, like, to be engaged in.
Yeah. And so like and so again, that's like really like subjective to what it is. To me, I think you and I share this sentiment of like, I want to see something and I want to feel moved, or like I want to understand the story behind what's going on here. I want to know where it's coming from, you know, like essentially, or like, or I want to be lost in what it is, you know. And like even like sometimes in some modern art pieces, literally the sole purpose is to create the exact opposite of that, you know. And so, and that's like in response to people like over millennia is like trying to achieve that, you know. And so it's in response to like being very contradictory to that, you know. And so it's just, and that's how that artist chooses to feel and how they choose to observe art in the way that they do it, you know. Like one of my favorite pieces at the Modern Art Museum that I work at now is it's literally just a urinal that is bronze. It's just, it has been plated in very shiny bronze, and it's literally like, it's been described as just like, it's more of a shock piece of kind of like, yep, it's a urinal and it's shiny. And so like, yeah, and so like you can't help but wonder, like, did it mean more to the artist that it exists, or is it the effect that it's having on people more important?
Yeah. And I think art and writing, because writing is a part of art for me, it's a way to stimulate conversation and engagement, and it's kind of a way to it. And then when you start having conversations that may really impact you more emotionally, you can go back to how you had conversations to kind of understand a different perspective, and then it might help you relate to other areas or other people or just other ideas in general. So I kind of feel like for me that is a huge importance of being introduced to art.
Oh yeah, definitely. I love that we have so many mediums for art to be created and to allow people to understand different concepts in different ways. You know, it's fascinating to see how it all works and what ends up coming out of it and what people learn from it. You know, I recently learned, oh my gosh, I watched a video essay recently about the Broadway show Cats. Do you know Cats?
Yes.
And so, do you know a little bit about the history behind cats?
The Old Opossum Book of Practical Cats by T.S. Eliot
Yeah,
background.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It was based on poetry. You know, it was based on a series of poems that were created into this visual, like, crazy experience. And like in the video essay that I watched was about like translating that visual crazy experience that came from poetry traversing into a completely different medium, which was like film with that movie that they came out with. And oh my gosh, like
I haven't watched it yet, but
I don't really plan to, but just because I think I've seen enough and I think I understand, you know. But it's like definitely like a testament of just like how the medium really affects the same kind of like concept and the same story, and like what do you get out of it. Like watching the movie, people are probably terrified of the idea of watching the Broadway show Cats now, you know. But people who go to watch the Broadway show Cats, they might not even know anything about the poetry behind it,
yes.
because it was just like this whole other thing, because they got something else out of the Broadway performance than the creator got from the poetry, you know. And
Yeah.
so it's so fascinating to see how like all these different mediums and how these all these different ways, whether it's writing, whether it's like film or just like traditional art, and how that's transcending um like the stories that it's trying to tell, like how much it affects it and how people respond to it. And I think it's like one of the beautiful wonders of like what humanity is. It really is.
Yeah. So, what are some of your favorite authors and why are they important to you?
Hmm. Yeah. Um, a lot of the my favorite authors are stemmed from like my childhood. Um, Life has kind of like taken me by the reins over the past like 10 years, and so I haven't done much reading, and I want to do more. But one of the things that like I and like young adult like novels, I think they fuel a lot of like current authors now too. And so like some of the authors that I used to read when I was much younger, you know, like Rick Riordan, um, got a lot of John Green in there too. Hank Green was someone that I mentioned earlier from that book about the young graphic designer writing from a women's perspective, and that's Hank Green. But and so like those are some authors that I like remember. And then like another recent book that I read, like, I think it was like a couple years ago, was called The Knicks by Neon Hill. Nathan Hill, I think his name was. Yeah, Nathan Hill. I had to look it up real quick. But um it's really, that one in particular, like I think has like stuck with me the most over the past couple of years. And I really love the way that he just managed to find like all these different perspectives and just blend it into this crazy theme of like political statements and statements about like our society in such crazy convoluted ways, because I would be reading it and I loved it so much, and people could see that I was enjoying reading it, and then they'd ask me, they're like, well, what is it about? And I'm like, I can't tell you. It's about everything. It's about like how people respond to situations. It's about like social constructs that we've created. It's about like the political climate. It's about like, you know. And I just really enjoyed the way that he was able to like bring all these crazy themes and how it all just worked together. And so I really like the way that he did that in particular.
Nice. I haven't read him, but I'll have to look him up.
Yeah, just read The Knicks. It's great.
um, so, where can the readers find you if they would like to connect with you more?
Yeah. You can follow me on Instagram if you want. I'm at underscore the number one cup of JoJo underscore again. I post very casual like illustrations and like little animations and stuff like that I do on there. But like you can follow me on there, as well as like if you want to like inquire about anything specifically graphic design related, I suggest you go to my website, which I think it's linked in like the bio to any of like the anthologies. You can find me there. And you can like once you get to my website, then you can see all the graphic design work that I've done specifically, and then you can find contact through there as well. And so, yeah.
Do you have any releases approaching? Any new writing coming out?
I think any of the writing that I have that will be coming out would probably be through Write Volumes.
Hey, so you'll write more for us.
Yeah, I want to like a lot of like what I write is very I guess I'm trying to like figure out where it fits, because I've written a lot of what they call like kind of like poetic short stories, you know, and I'm not sure where they fit in everything. And I'm also trying to figure out I have this like I've written like, I don't know, 10 pages of just like poetry that's very similar to knowing,
Mhm.
and just like all these different things, and like I've been just writing and collecting all these things, and like I've thought about like releasing it in something somehow, but I still don't know yet. I want to like build more and figure out like how this all could fit together if I were to do something, because I think it would be pretty awesome to like have a collection of poetry or something like that at some point. Um, but that's kind of like where I'm going with my writing. Like you'll probably see things through Write Volumes. If not, like I'll probably post it on Instagram or something like that. Be like, hey, I wrote this poem. Here you go. Like I wrote a poem recently actually on Instagram that was about just like 2020 in general.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, it's called Concerning Recent Events. And I don't know, I kind of just like I release every form of art or every form of narrative wherever I think it works best. More often than not, it's just like on Instagram, or sometimes you'll see a new project pop up on my website. So I don't know, if you
Nice.
follow me, you'll probably see one of them up too.
Um, so thank you for your time, and thank you so much for your writing, Jojo. We also want to thank everyone for listening. This is Behind the Volume Look at Write Volumes in the Making. Please check us out more for latest info. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And remember, together we can write volumes.